Hello and welcome to Zabbix series. My name is Artur Slontons and today we're going to be talking about deploying Zabbix from packages on different database backends, from MySQL to Postgres with TimescaleDB extension. So let's get started. Alright, so I have the Zabbix download page open here and we will start with installing Zabbix on a MySQL database backend on Apache. I will select the Zabbix version 6.0 and then I will select the OS distribution, which will be Oracle 8 in my case. So Oracle 8, MySQL Apache. Then we will have to install our MySQL database backend, and then we can simply follow these here instructions. We'll execute all of these steps in this video and start using Zabbix. So let's switch to our terminal. Alright, so I have switched to my terminal and now let's install the MySQL database backend. So the command to do that is simple dnf install MySQL server. Yes, this will install MySQL 8. So we do need a database backend where we store all of our configuration, all of our metrics, users, and so on, everything essentially. And for this use case, the first one we'll be using MySQL, which is probably one of the more common ones, most well documented from the community side, since MySQL usage is very widespread out there. So let's give this a moment to finish installing MySQL Server 8, and then we can continue with the initial MySQL configuration. Alright, so everything has been installed. Let's start our MySQL instance. So systemctl enable MySQL d -- now. Now means that it will not just enable it, but it will also start it. Alright, let's give it a moment to start up. And now what I recommend doing is executing the MySQL secure installation binary. I will copy and paste it here. So it's located under user bin MySQL secure installation. This will give you some initial configuration steps that are very beneficial. For example, by default, the root user for MySQL doesn't have any password. So this will help us set up that. So first it will ask me if I wish to have the validate password component, which accepts only relatively complex passwords. I will skip this for my test instance. I will use a simple password. Then I will provide a password for root user here. So new password. There we go. Remove anonymous users. Yes. Disallow root logins remotely. In my case, yes, but once again, depends on your requirement. Remove test database. Yes. And reload the privilege tables. So all of our changes are applied. Yes. Okay, that's done. MySQL has been started. It's running. We've done some minor initial tuning security-wise. But also one more thing that we can do is we can open the MySQL config file located under etc my.cnf. And we will see that it includes files in etc mycnf directory. And this is where we will be able to tune our MySQL further. So let me quit. I will open etc mycnf.d, and then if we look at it, we have MySQL server.cnf. That's what we're looking for, MySQL server.cnf. And here we can provide some additional parameters for MySQL tuning. This is very much recommended for your instances, especially if they're not QA instances, but production instances. So we do have blog posts and videos on how to tune MySQL for Zabbix. General tuning rules do apply here, so if you're familiar with MySQL, you might be able to do this on your own, but definitely do some initial tuning. Since I'm doing a small test instance here, I will leave it as is. MySQL will use defaults, but you should definitely do some tuning. The same will apply for Postgres, another database that we will look at today. All right, and now we can continue with the installation of Zabbix. So the Zabbix installation steps are quite simple. First, we have to install Zabbix repository. The command, you can copy it from the download page. I will copy it here. So we're installing Zabbix 6.0 repo. Quite quick. I will also clean my DNF cache in case if I have some old Zabbix version repositories or components cached in. Cleaning the cache will sort of help you avoiding some potential issues when installing or upgrading Zabbix. So I have cleaned it. Next, I will install the Zabbix components. Once again, dnf install. I will copy the command from the download page and then Zabbix server for MySQL. So notice that these packages have a suffix. So Zabbix server MySQL is a package for MySQL. Zabbix Web is the Zabbix Web package for MySQL, and so on. Then we'll be installing Apache Web Backend. We will be downloading the Zabbix SQL scripts and the SC Linux policy and the agent. So let's pass a yes to it, and let's install all of these components. So since we have quite a few components here, from server to front end to SQL scripts to SC Linux policies, this might take a while. Notice that the SQL scripts package is something that's relatively new. The package contains the sort of initial setup SQL scripts that you will require for your fresh environment. Usually in previous versions, they were contained within the Zabbix server package. Now we have a separate package for that. So there are not only upgrade scripts or initial setup scripts, there are a couple of other things in there, everything to do with changes to Zabbix database or implementing a new database or upgrading a database to, for example, use primary keys, which is something that 6.0 introduced. So the scripts are in the SQL scripts package. So let's give this a moment to finish installing Zabbix components, and it's done. So now what we have to do is we have to create the initial database. So let's log into MySQL user root and then password. I will pass the password that I provided for it. I'm logged in. And now I will create the initial database. The commands, once again, are available in the download page. So the character set and collation are used for Zabbix to not only support multilingual, essentially, environments, but also to be able to make distinction between lowercase and uppercase letters. So that's what the collation is for, and it's a requirement. So if you're following the download page commands, you will be good to go. Next up, we need to create a Zabbix user. Once again, copy the command from the download page, create user Zabbix at localhost, identified by, and provide your password. I will provide an insecure password for my QA environment since I'm isolated from everything out there, but you provide something a bit more secure. So let's use Zabbix as a password, and then we will grant our Zabbix user privileges on the Zabbix database, grant all privileges on Zabbix to Zabbix at localhost. All right, privileges granted. Now we can quit MySQL, and now we have an empty Zabbix database with a user that has the necessary privileges on it. Our next step would be to deploy the initial database schema and data on this empty database. So once again, copy the command from the download page. There it is. We will open up this archive over here, server.sql, and we will import it on our Zabbix database by using the Zabbix user. Press enter and provide the password for your Zabbix user. And now we have to wait for a moment, so don't cancel anything. The schema and the data are currently being imported, so it may take a while depending on your performance and some other things, so don't cancel this. Okay, we can see that the import has finished. I haven't touched anything, it will finish by itself. And now we have to open the Zabbix server configuration file located under etc Zabbix zabbixserver.conf, and I will search for DB password over here, and I will provide my database password. DB password is Zabbix. All right, so there are a couple of other database credentials and other parameters that we can provide. For example, database user, database socket, database schema, which is something that can be used for Postgres, database name over here if we have created a database with a different name, and of course, database host. In my case, all of the components are running on the same machine, so I will be using the default local host, but your case could be different. Let's save the changes. And now we can attempt and start the Zabbix components. So I will do a systemctl enable for every component, Zabbix server, Zabbix agent, web frontend, and PHP. Everything has been started. And just to be safe, we can check Zabbix logs. So open var log Zabbix server log, and we can see everything has been started. There are some warning messages, which is perfectly fine. Java Polar isn't running because we haven't enabled it in the config file. Same for IPMI manager, same for VMware collector. So perfectly fine, no database errors, nothing. Everything has been started. Okay, now we can open up our front end. All right, and once we have opened the IP address of our frontend / Zabbix, it will move us to the configuration of the frontend. So the IP address here, I'm running everything on the same machine. So that's the IP address of my frontend, server and database also. So first we have to select the language. Then we have to go through the prerequisite checklist, check if everything is supported and okay. Next, we have to provide the user and the password over here for the front end to be able to connect to the database. That's the user that we created previously on the MySQL database itself. Then the database type, host, port, and name. Since everything's running on the same machine, in my case, I will use the default. Then go through the next step, optionally provide Zabbix server name. This is completely optional. Default time zone, default theme, and then pre-installation summary, and we should be good to go. Log in with the default username admin and password Zabbix all lowercase, and you're good to go. All right, so we have managed to install Zabbix on a MySQL backend. Let's move to Postgres. All right, for our second example, we will use Zabbix 6.0, Oracle Linux, but this time we will be installing Zabbix on a Postgres database backend. So once again, the instructions are quite similar, except here we will see Postgres commands. And of course, as a prerequisite, we have to deploy a Postgres database backend. So let's open our terminal and let's do just that. All right, so first things first, we have to install the Postgres repository. We'll be installing the Postgres 14. So let's install the Postgres 14 repository. We will be using the latest repo, and we'll be using the one used for RHEL 8 since it's compatible with Oracle Linux 8. So let's install it. And after that will be done, we will have to do some additional steps exclusive to Postgres. But let's wait for the repository to be installed. All right, the repository has been installed. So next, let's do an optional step and let's check if we have some modules for older Postgres versions enabled, and let's disable them. You can find the command over here. Let's run it. I don't think that on this machine it will necessarily find any older modules, but better to be safe. This very much depends on your specific environment. So let's give this a moment. It will check for older Postgres versions and disable the corresponding modules. All right, and now we can safely install Postgres 14 server. So there it is, DNF install. Yes, Postgres 14 server. Let's install it. And this might take a moment. Once again, same as with the MySQL database backend. So let's give this some time. All right, that was actually rather quick. Now we have to initialize the Postgres 14 database. And there we go. We need to run the Postgres 14 setup with initialize database. Let's run it. The database has been initialized successfully. All right, all's good. Now we can try and start the Postgres database itself. System control, enable Postgres 14. Now we will enable and start it. Success. Now we need to verify that everything is working and connect to the Postgres user. So we will use sudo su to connect to it. Success, we have connected to Postgres. That's great. Now we can open the Postgres command line over here. There we go. And we have connected to the Postgres instance and it's up and running. Everything looks good. All right, let's quit. Let's exit from the Postgres user. And now, of course, same as with MySQL, ideally you would have to do some tuning. So let's open var lib pgsql 14 data and then postgresql.conf. And here we can find the Postgres configuration parameters that once again we need to tune. I will show you a good tool to use for initial tuning in a moment, but what I wish to tune right now, right off the bat, is maximum connections. So let's search for max connections, and it's 100, which depending on the size of your Zabbix instance might be maybe too small. So maybe you wish to tune it up to 150. Let's Save this, and let's restart Postgres. So system control, restart PostgreSQL 14. Good, and the changes have been applied. As for the other parameters, I highly recommend this here pgtune online tool. You can find it over here. I will leave the link in the description, where you can essentially provide your hardware specifications, and the tool will generate some recommended parameters for your Postgres configuration. So for example, mixed type of application. Let's say I have 8 gigs, 4 CPUs, 150 connections, SSD storage. And there we go. It has provided me a nice, decent initial configuration, which is once again better than the default one. So that's something that can be good if you're maybe not feeling comfortable configuring Postgres from scratch yourself. All right, now let's move back to our terminal and let's install Zabbix. All right, some of the next steps should feel quite familiar to you. So once again, we will install Zabbix 6.0 repository. There we go, it has been installed. We will do a DNF clean all to clean the DNF cache, and we will install Zabbix component, such as the server, the front end, the agent. So let's give them some time to get installed. Note that this time we are using the PGSQL packages as opposed to MySQL packages, because for server and the web components, there are individual packages for different types of database backends. So that's something that you don't want to mix up. PGSQL for Postgres, MySQL for MySQL. All right, the components have been installed. Now what we have to do is we have to create a Zabbix user for our Postgres database. Create user Zabbix and provide a password for it. Zabbix, like so, and verify it. Then we also have to create an empty database. Let's do this. So create database Zabbix. Let's go. And next up, we have to import the initial schema, same as we did for MySQL. So let's copy the command, and as opposed to MySQL, we can actually see the tables and indexes and all of the data getting inserted into the database and getting created. So we just have to let it finish. Once we have finished importing the initial schema and data, once again, we have to open Zabbix, zabbixserver.conf, look for the database password fields and maybe any other fields that we need to tune and configure, and provide the password, the host name, schema, socket, and so on. In my case, I will be providing only the password and saving the configuration. Now we can try and start the Zabbix component, same as before. System control, enable Zabbix server, agent frontend with the now flag, and this will essentially not only enable but also start everything. Let's check the Zabbix server logs, var log Zabbix server log. No error messages, everything seems to be good. And now, same as before, we can log into our frontend, do the initial frontend configuration, and we should be good to go. But that's not all. Let's also deploy the TimescaleDB extension on this here Postgres instance. To install the TimescaleDB, we will be using the official Timescale documentation. Feel free to open it up and follow my commands. Once again, I will be installing on Oracle Linux 8, where RHEL 8 instructions also work. Once we have installed Timescale, then we will have to deploy some prerequisite configuration available in the Zabbix documentation. Once again, feel free to open up this here TimescaleDB setup page and follow what I'm doing. So let's get started and let's open up our terminal and deploy TimescaleDB. So over here, I am using the same instance as in the previous example. We have Zabbix with Postgres database backend running, and I will start by stopping it. System control stop Zabbix server. So there we go. Give it a moment. Everything has been stopped. And we will first create a TimescaleDB repository file. You can find the command in the TimescaleDB official documentation. I will simply copy and paste it and hit enter. and I have created a TimescaleDB repository file. Then I will install TimescaleDB for Postgres 14. So over here, DNF install, TimescaleDB2, Postgres 14, yes. So let's give it a moment. It will grab the new repository and it should be installed in a bit. All right, we have installed Timescale. Now what we have to do, I will execute the TimescaleDB tune, which will essentially provide some initial tuning for TimescaleDB instances. It's not perfect, and we will have to fix it up most likely in a moment, but it does optimize your database for Timescale. So we will have to provide our PG config location, which is user PGSQL 14 bin and then PG config, TimescaleDB tune. Let's run it. Now it's asking us about some of the parameters that it wants to apply. I will agree to everything and then manually change some things. But in real life, of course, go through each one of these and decide if they work for you or should they be tuned differently. All right. And the TimescaleDB tune has been executed and it has updated our configuration. We can take a look at it. And I will change one parameter most likely. So let's open our Postgres config file. And what I'm going to change is the max connections. If I recall correctly, yes, it has reset them to 25, which is not sufficient. I will move it back to 150 as it was before. Save. And afterwards also restart Postgres. Let's do it like so to apply the changes. Now what we have to do is a couple of simple steps. First, we need to apply the TimescaleDB extension on Zabbix database. You can find the command in our documentation. So create extension TimescaleDB on Zabbix. And we can see that the extension has been applied. And then we have to do some initial configuration for Timescale by running a timescaledb.sql script. Once again, it's located in the Zabbix SQL scripts directory under user shared doc, Postgres, TimescaleDB, and we will use our Zabbix user and apply it on our Zabbix database. And it has been applied successfully. Let's try and start our Zabbix server and let's see if Timescale is running. Let's check our log files, var log Zabbix server log. Everything has been started, no error messages. Another thing that we can do now is we can open up our front end and take a look if we have some new settings under housekeeping. All right, so let's navigate to administration, general, housekeeping. And if we scroll all the way down, we can see that yes, now with TimescaleDB, we have the option to compress our history and trends records, which will greatly free up the space on our database backend server. And also under the hood, we have automated partitioning running. So that's also extremely great. No need to run any custom scripts. So that's that. I hope you enjoyed this. We have deployed Zabbix on MySQL, Postgres, and Postgres with Timescale database backends. This should work as a nice initial guide if you're starting fresh with Zabbix, or maybe you're switching between database backends and you're new to Postgres, for example, and wondering how it can be quickly configured. Thank you for your interest, guys. I hope this was useful, and I'll see you next time.